Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah Show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah Show kicks off this hour. Joining me is my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. How's things going up there?
Steve, I've run my life off of a 37 amp hour battery for the last week. That's what I've been doing.
So you didn't have any servers running?
No, they were not running off the 37 amp hour batteries, Steve. That would be ridiculous. They wouldn't run very long. No. But I've gotten like side attached, basically think of like a barnacle, except it's battery, and it's attached to me, and I've been taking it around everywhere. So I charge my phone off of it. I've been charging my laptop off of it. I've learned that I can run a hot plate for 4 hours. I can run a TV all night. I can run a fan and a little strip of LED lights to make it feel environment and cool and chill.
Very nice. And what was the point of the experiment?
Well, the point of the experiment, Steve, was I was challenged in a way. I was part of a group that they purchased a Yeti 1500 Goal Zero. Are you familiar with the Goal Zero from Yeti?
Why don't you explain it to the audience?
Well, so it's, in the same way that Yeti makes a dog bowl that's like $60, and I don't know who out there is buying their dog $60 bowls, but apparently Yeti makes one. They also make this device that is $1,800, and it provides 3,500 watts of power. Now, initially, it was kind of interesting to me because I was working with a group, and they used one of these to go to do a musical performance out in the middle of a lake on a boat. And so they couldn't run a generator because they didn't want the noise, and so they used this Yeti Goal Zero. And at first I was really intrigued by the idea. I think it's fantastic. You have this big battery and it powers, and it's fantastic. They've also included Anderson power poles, which I articulate are the best 12-volt connectors man has ever created. They're genderless. They support up to 45 amps, actually larger if you go with their bigger series. They're great little universal connectors. However, it's $1,800 for this box, and it's a box that is made by Yeti, and so you got to buy all their connectors, and of course, I'm sure if the battery goes out, you have to send it to them or get their replacement. I don't want any of that. Also, oh, by the way, the size of this thing is ginormous. It's like the size of a cooler, and they actually sell an accessory as a cart. Steve, if you have to have a cart as an accessory to move your power center around, your power center is probably a little bit too large, and maybe it weighs too much. So I decided I was going to build my own. Now, to be fair, and we'll have links for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com, there is a device that you can buy for like $200. There's a couple different places that make them. Vanamize is one of them. PowerWorks is another. We'll have links for both of those in the show notes. So if you just want to buy a thing and set your own battery in, these will do it. I had a different approach. So what I did was I parted out the things that I wanted to run. Things like a particular kind of inverter. I wanted a pure sine wave inverter that could do up to 2,000 watts so that I can power my anything is what I want to do. And I've learned that I can power an air conditioner for a very short amount of time, and I can power a hot plate longer than I thought, and I can power a TV all night. Then I went through and found all of the little mounts that I want. So I want Type-C power. I want Anderson power poles for just dragging raw 12 volts out of the box. I want that. And then I want AC outlets attached to the inverter as well as a switch to be able to turn the inverter on and off. And so I added all of that up together, and I mounted it inside of essentially a knockoff Pelican case. And so I'm experimenting with it a little bit. I'm going to see how far I can get. Right now I've got a little 37 amp hour battery that I'm using, and it seems it's doing way better than I thought. Long term, my intention is to, and I'll have links for this in the show notes as well, long term intention is to purchase lithium ion phosphate batteries and integrate like an actual lithium ion charger, and then I can charge up my little battery bank, and if I need to expand it, I could still get to 3,500 watts like the Yeti. I'll just break it up into smaller chunks. Am I crazy, or am I on the road to power self-sufficiency?
Well, power self-sufficiency might be a little bit of a stretch.
All of it, Steve. The
I don't know how
laptop
much
and
your
the
house
cell phone.
uses.
Maybe you missed it. Both of them are powered by this 37 amp hour battery.
I think it's a neat idea. I'm curious to how much does it weigh, the Pelican case that you're toting around?
Currently, I haven't put it on a scale. I'm guessing currently it's probably 15 pounds. Obviously, if I purchase 3,500 watt hours of lithium batteries, it's going to weigh significantly more. However, I would add that I would split those up into smaller cases. So instead of having like one gigantic cooler, I'd have a number of them and then I could just connect them together. Because I'd rather have smaller modular devices that are easy to move around than one big honking thing that I got to have 4 big, strong, burly men to lift up.
I'd be interested to see if you could make it in a different form factor. Like, so I'm thinking about keeping it in the truck as part of an emergency preparedness kind of kit. And so in that case, we don't have a trunk, but the storage is under the seat. And so it would have to be longer than wider in terms of that, because you wouldn't want it rolling around in the bed.
So the most immediate problem I see would be storing a lithium battery inside of a car in the winter is probably not going to work out well.
Well, I mean, it's better than not having it at all. And the idea is at least in my case, the truck parked in the garage, so it's constantly above zero. So unless, I keep one of those small Ryobi hand pumps for your tires and stuff like that with a 2 amp hour battery in my truck all the time, so as part of the emergency preparedness kit. And that little thing can do 2.5 of your 4 tires from flat to, I don't know, 40 PSI or something.
Wow. That's incredible.
So yeah, like anything along that vein. And then in the wintertime, obviously does less, like, as you know, the capacity in the battery gets spent much quicker when it's cold. But
so I because I have this battery with me, of course I'm not going to bother with my little 2-hour laptop battery. I have like a week and a half long laptop battery, right? So I went to Buffalo Wild Wings and I took my 37 amp hour battery that's in my little ammo case and I set it on the table. And of course, at this point, this is what do we call research and development, right? So I've not dialed it in yet. I'm still experimenting, Steve. And so I have these leads connected with little alligator clips and I have it and on the battery, and then I've got it running over to a little DC, my little Type C 75 watt thing that I'm testing that converts 12 volts to 75 watts USB-C power. And then I've got a Type C cable going to my laptop. The waitress comes over and she looks, she's like, what's going on here? I'm like, well, it's a bit of a science project, a little bit of a practical thing, but mostly I'm just trying to get on the internet. And she's like, we have Wi-Fi. I don't think you need, it's like, I don't know. I'm sure it looked kind of weird, but it was fun. And I'm making it way further than I thought. I thought this thing was going to drain itself in the first few hours and nothing, but like actually turns out you get a lot of juice out of a 37 amp hour battery. So anyway, that's been my experiment, and I'm going to continue to do it and see how far I can push this. So far, what I've learned is I basically am going to be stuck with AC for the foreseeable future for heating things, cooling things, and moving things. Like there's no good way to power a car electric. I shouldn't say that, but like not off of batteries that I can affordably do. And same thing is true for heating, and the same thing is true for cooling. So those things are kind of out of my realm. But everything else, I'm fine. It's actually really shocking to me how basically everything in my life is already DC, and we're just converting it from AC to DC at each individual device.
Yeah, most, especially electronics, they rely on DC. AC is terrible, absolutely terrible for electronics. You don't want the current going back and forth 60 times a second. That would be terrible for them.
Should we get into some feedback?
Absolutely.
Our first piece of email or feedback comes in from David. David writes in and asks for a camera suggestion. Hey guys, are you guys aware of a 2K or 4K camera which can act as a standalone device, such as store video on a memory card? A portable, not requiring mounting would be a plus. I'd like to store video on or off the web. The camera might operate in an area without Wi-Fi. Thanks. P.S. I enjoy the show. P.P.S. On the show, you mentioned that Wine Flatpak is a good option versus the direct install or a PPA. I'm using Mint and Ubuntu. So let's go backwards, Steve. What would you say in response to how you would go about installing Wine?
I guess it depends on my use case. Part of the idea with the Flatpak is that other things have to be aware of it, right? So if you have some sort of bottle manager that can tap into the version on the Flatpak, sure, why not? Honestly, Wine doesn't. I have to be careful with this. Wine doesn't really clutter up your system a lot because it's not really interdependent on anything else in the system. So you could just go in and nuke all of your wine installations and really not affect anything left in your applications, right? Anything that you install from your package manager will continue to work fine because there's no dependency on wine. So aside from, I have 15 different profiles from wine for all these different games. I'm not exactly sure what wine in a flat pack buys you over a deb, other than maybe easier updates or something of that nature, something newer.
As to David's camera question, I really like the Axis 2035. So the Axis M2035 is, I believe, a 4K camera, and it absolutely has a SD card in it. And so you're going to be able to do what you're looking to do, which is to record the footage directly to the SD card. Now, where it's going to get... Oh, you know what? I lied. The 2035 is the 1080p. I'll put the 4K link for you in the show notes. I don't remember the model number off the top of my head, but the advantage of doing that, and the way that we sell them to customers, we tell them, hey, you know what you can do is you put this up and have it connected to your NVR. If the NVR ever goes offline, then you're able to just pull the footage from the SD card. So it kind of acts as a backup, but you absolutely could do it as just the only thing that you have. One thing I might consider, so it sounds, you said you might not have Wi-Fi, and of course these cameras are going to really want to be hardwired anyway. If you're going into the kind of location where you're trying to capture a little bit of footage and pull it onto an SD card, in that scenario, I'm probably honestly not looking at a security camera and going more for like a trail camera kind of a thing. So the nice thing about trail cameras are they're only going to be active when there's motion or when there's something going on. They're going to be weatherproof if it's going outside and you need it to be weatherproof. And you'll be able to capture them on local storage because the entire things are designed from the ground up to be independent. So I might consider those routes. Steve, anything to add to that?
It's a tough call. The Axis cameras are kind of the security camera sort of thing, like you were talking about. A lot of people are looking more for something like a Eufy camera or a Ring camera or something of that ilk when they're talking about this sort of need. So I think the question becomes, what are we trying to do with it? How are you trying to access it? And ultimately, what is the longevity and where are you going to stick it? Because there's a bunch of questions here that, for example, the Axis cameras might go outside if you get the right model. Is that something you need? You pay extra for having something kind of weatherproofed. Is that something you need? We don't really know, right? So a bigger definition of what the requirements are here is probably more useful in opening the conversation, because it's not an insignificant investment when you're talking about going with something like an Axis camera, where even though you can get them on eBay, they are generally more expensive than like a Eufy or a Ring camera or whatever that
absolutely
that so it really depends on what you're trying to do. And there seems to be more definition that needs to happen in order for this conversation to be really fleshed out well.
So I'll put a link to the Axis. By the way, I did track it down. It is the P3248. That's their current version. Now, what Steve was talking about eBay, that's really a nice little hidden trick, right? So if you just look at older models, Axis, one of the reasons I really like them, they push firmware updates forever. So we had some devices that went out of, that they stopped making back in 2019. They're pushing support for them out to 2028. So you'll still be able to get firmware and updates for them, which is great. And then once they hit 2028, you can always VLAN them off onto their own little world, and it sounds like you're not maybe even connecting there. So we'll put the Axis P3248 in there for you. I'll put a recommendation for a trail cam for you. And if you want to get back to us with more information on what you're trying to do, we'll happily take that as well. Chaz writes in and says, hey, Steve, why does NASA use Linux?
I don't know why.
Because you can't open Windows in space or anywhere else. That's clever, Chaz. I appreciate it. Works on my box. Ask the Marlin bot. So actually, Marlin got some upgrades this week. We opened them up. flipped him over, did an overhaul, and we installed some new features to Marlin. So if you're not familiar with Marlin, he's a dude that hangs out in our chat room. He's an automated sort of a dude that runs on a DigitalOcean Dropit connected to the Linux Delta server. And he watches for your feedback. And so if you message him or you tag him to send feedback, he will do that. Well, he has a new feature. So the new functionality is if you see a comment that is in the Geek Lab that you're like, hey, they should talk about that on air, or hey, they should mention that or respond to that, you can simply react to it with the newspaper icon. And or with a newspaper emoji. So if you react with the newspaper emoji, Marlin will say, you think I should put that on the air? You think Noah and Steve should talk about that? And he will respond with the green check mark. When you click on the green check mark, boom, Bob's your uncle. It delivers it right in front of our face. And so when we sit down to do the show next week, we'll be able to do that. So as you're perusing the Geek Lab, now I don't think this is going to work across the other bridge spaces, but if you're on Matrix proper and you react and you come across something in the Geek Lab that you're like, hey, I want to draw their attention to that, simply react with the little newspaper emoji and then click on the check mark and it will bring it to the front of our attention. So Works on My Box said, Steve, I'm playing catch up on the podcast right now, and I'm in the middle of episode 309. I was curious if you were using simple login for the email aliases or if you're doing it some other way. If you're not using simple log, I highly recommend you to check it out. It's made by Proton. Actually, they bought it, and it's covered under their paid plan. Steve, your thoughts?
I have used it. When I first checked it out, it was kind of one of those, hey, why don't you try this out? And then there was an additional cost afterwards or something that I had to do. So I was only running it on a trial. Mm-hmm. It was fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I found that using a catch-all, which is basically what I'm doing. So you basically turn on your email domain to allow you to get email to anything at your domain, and then it sends it to a specific email box. That's kind of how we use it to track things like spam. So, for example, you walk into Best Buy, and it's also kind of priceless to watch them try and digest this. They're like, can you give me an email? I'm like, yeah, my email is bestbuy@somedomain.com. And they're just like, okay.
No, we're Best Buy.
It really helps you figure out who's been leaking your emails as well. Because, so for example, Kickstarter is a terrible, terrible offender for this. I continuously get emails from not Kickstarter, from just random advertisers or people trying to sell you stuff that comes into that Kickstarter email.
Well, how would that be? The only place you've ever used it is Kickstart.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. And it also allows you to just be like, you know what? I'm just going to block this now. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm no longer going to accept this. This can go right into the spam or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that works really well to kind of get separation. So it's not a true alias because you can't reply from it. You can choose which type of email you are going to reply from. So like in Proton Mail for specifically, the plan that I'm on is 10 actual email boxes per user. And so between my wife and I, we've got 20 actual boxes, and we don't even use the actual boxes unless it's something like I have one for, when we bought the house, there was all kinds of stuff that I needed to be able to reply to real estate and all the rest of that sort of stuff. So I made that an actual mailbox. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, if you're just replying from an email, you can say, hey, my default when it comes into an unknown email box. So like the Kickstarter one, my default is reply from whatever email address you want. And I've actually been using the Proton one because I don't care whether people spam that one because I don't use that one a ton anyways.
Have you ever played with sub-addressing aliases in Proton?
I have not.
So this is interesting. It's Proton's answer to solve the problem that you were kind of talking about, to where you have these other, these other things. So what you do is you put like let's say the address is shop@mydomain.com. You can add Best Buy plus shop, like on the fly, Best Buy plus shop@mydomain.com, and then on the flip side, it will accept that email because it knows to add anything at the plus. But then on the flip side, you can go back and say, okay, I'm gonna hash that, sort that back out.
No, I don't. I'd have to think about why there would be an advantage to doing that over what we currently do, because when you turn on the catch-all, you don't actually have to ever interact with Proton Mail. You can just say any random gibberish at mydomain.com and it will come into the email box you've specified.
Yeah, the idea would be to sort it out later, right? So you could say like, hey, I'm on the fly and I want to create this thing. Then I just add the plus to it and I have an option for taking later on. Your feedback is welcome at live@asknoahshow.com. We invite you to do that, or give us a call, 855-450-NOAH, 855-450-6624, or you can join us in the interactive Mumble Room. You can learn more at minddripmedia.com.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of July 30th, 2023, here's the Linux and open source news. Canonical has announced a real-time Ubuntu optimized for Intel Core CPUs. Due to ongoing frustrations with the AMD FTPM hardware random number generator, Linus has suggested disabling the FTPM hardware usage on CPUs that have the RD-RAND instruction already. Open Media Vault has released version 6.5. The GNOME devs are working on a new window management system. The new windowing system would use a mosaic behavior by default with tiling capabilities. CIQ spins out its own Red Hat Ansible interface called Ascender, and Nginx has unveiled a new open source subscription. In open source hardware news, a team from MIT has tested an open source cooling chamber that uses 75% less energy than refrigerated cold rooms. Pixel Pump is an open source manual pick and place assist tool that's now available. Castmill, a digital signage software platform, has announced Castmill 2.0 will launch as open source software, along with featuring extensive overhaul and updates leveraging over a decade of insights from previous versions. In open source AI news, a coalition of half a dozen open source AI stakeholders, Hugging Face, GitHub, Eleuther AI, Creative Commons, Lion, and Open Future, are calling on EU policymakers to protect open source innovation as they finalize the EU AI Act, which will be the world's first comprehensive AI law. And in security news, adversary-focused cybersecurity provider SpectreOps has released a new version of its open-source penetration testing software called Bloodhound to help open-source users. The Abyss Locker operation is the latest to develop a Linux encryptor to target VMware's ESXi virtual machine platforms in attacks on the enterprise. Like other ransomware operations, the Abyss Locker threat actors will breach corporate networks, steal data for double extortion, and encrypt devices on the network. The stolen data is then used as leverage by threatening to leak files if the ransomware is not paid. To leak the stolen files, the threat actors have created a Tor data leak site called Abyss Data that currently lists 14 victims. Akira ransomware has expanded to Linux. Akira was introduced to the cybersecurity sector in March of 2023, which targets several financial institutions and organizations for stealing sensitive data. Akira has been using a Tor website for their communications with perpetrators and for posting the leaked data publicly if their ransom demands are not met from affected organizations. Cloud security firm Wiz has disclosed 2 severe security vulnerabilities in Ubuntu. They claim the easy-to-exploit shortcomings have the potential to impact 40% of Ubuntu users. And lastly, the FBI has warned that hackers are tapping open-source generative AI programs for all kinds of heinous acts, including developing malware and phishing attacks.
Joining us, it is Louis Abel, the release engineer and lead for Rocky Linux, and Neil Hanlon, the infrastructure lead for the RESF and Rocky Linux. Gentlemen, welcome into the program.
Thanks so much for having us.
Hey, thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time. So I want to start back when Red Hat releases the news that they're making these changes to their code system. What is the reaction from Rocky and those of you that are on the RESF? How did you guys react to that news?
Yeah, so I think probably even before that announcement came out, the night before even, we were all kind of wondering what was going on. It was, I think, Wednesday, if I remember correctly, and we were like, why weren't there updates that came out last Tuesday? And there was like one thing that had trickled in the Tuesday before. So we were kind of all talking internally, and one of our channels about, like, is this just a mistake? We knew about this Bugzilla that had been opened by one of the Alma folks saying that there weren't updates coming to git.centos.org. And so we kind of went to bed and woke up more or less to the news of the change that Red had announced to git.centos.org. So as you can imagine, is pretty chaotic, I guess, as we were trying to figure out what was happening, and people were equally asking us to comment on what it meant and what we were going to do, and we obviously didn't really have a good answer for anyone. And yeah, I think after initially kind of fielding a lot of those questions, we started to organize and figure out what this meant and what it was going to mean for us, and how we were going to evolve and react to that. Liz, do you have anything else that I kind of missed there?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, from my perspective, I was actually just confused, honestly. I mean, most of my reaction was just confusion. Before, when we weren't getting anything, and then confusion after the announcement. It was just like I just didn't understand. It was I was just very confused about the whole thing. I know I think for a lot of people it was like confusion and then all of a sudden to being upset, but I just remained confused, well, why? I don't completely understand. I mean, I understand now, but then I was just confused for days. It seemed like. So that was my reaction, my personal reaction to it.
Did either of you have any idea that any of this was coming down the pipe? Like you said, it was, the night before, a little bit before that, you hadn't seen any updates come down the pipe. Was that something that you'd experienced before? Was there something else that you kind of assumed that, well, maybe this is why this is happening? Or was it pretty clear early on something has changed, something is amiss?
There was something similar that happened about probably I would say maybe a month prior, where updates weren't coming in, and the only reason why I realized it was I was doing something in git.centos.org for some reason. I can't remember what I was doing. I think I was trying to clone a fork of something that I had there, and I couldn't commit. And I couldn't commit because it was trying to send. There was some kind of message queue thing or something that was trying to send, and it was being kind of weird. And Neil had reached out to I can't remember his name.
Fabian.
Yeah, so he reached out to him to ask hey, what's going on? And so there was actually a technical problem that they had to fix, and then the update started trickling back in. And so my initial reaction to updates not coming in was oh, did another weird thing happen? Did a weird technical thing happen again that he needs to address or help with? And we just went to sleep because okay, we'll just address this in the morning, right? And yeah,
and it's definitely something that has happened or had happened for it, I suppose is the correct way to say that. And it's from what I understand, I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, obviously, but it's a rather kind of hacky process, dare I say, or it was a hacky process, how it was published there based off of when artifacts were published to the Red Hat CDN. And so it was always, at least from what I kind of gathered from the mind trust behind CentOS and everything else, and my knowledge over the years, was more of sort of a best effort sort of publication there. And it was a good signal that the packages were coming out, but it wasn't necessarily tied to the release. It was something that happened after the release of the packages, and it could be delayed. We were aware that was a possibility.
So can you guys talk to us a little bit about what value Rocky provides to the wider Linux community that your community feels that Red Hat or CentOS or both doesn't really provide for the community?
I think some of the things that we do does kind of provide a value to some users, and for example, being able to, and this might, to some people this may be very minor and might not be a big deal, but providing, for example, live images. If someone wants to run some enterprise Linux as a desktop. There's people out there who do that. I used to do that when I was many years ago. And so having those live images, I think, is very, very useful. Red Hat doesn't seem to provide those as far as I'm aware. They just have a single DVD installer, for example. We also have some special interest groups that are coming around to add newer kernels, not by default, but like have extra kernels, have extra packages that, you wouldn't be able to find in other places, or maybe newer than what's like in other places. We also do Raspberry Pi stuff. I think having that kind of support's pretty cool too. And I kind of understand probably why Red Hat doesn't want to do Raspberry Pi things, but we have some like faithful people who are like really into that sort of thing. And so having that kind of dedicated group to do stuff like that is really cool. And
yeah, I think you hit a lot of the same things I would cover in terms of our special interest groups and folks that are involved in these different projects. One of our security team leads is heavily involved in the OSSec project for OpenSCAP, and he wrote the DISA STIG, in documentation stuff, and he's involved in all of that processes. So we have a lot of different interests, I think, that are part of our community, and it's always been my goal and continues to be my goal to drive the contributions inside Rocky to collaborate and be cooperative with upstreams wherever those are, whether it is whether it is CentOS Stream and Red Hat, or it's Fedora, or it's OpenSUSE, or another community that's tangential or related somehow as an upstream or not, right? That's where we want to add value and provide value, and that's where I've been personally putting, my money where my mouth is, I guess, and going and contributing to those projects, and being involved in CentOS Stream and Fedora and Apple, and coming to the meetings for ELN, that's Enterprise Linux Next, a continuous kind of rebuild of Fedora Rawhide using the config options that will become Enterprise Linux in the next version. From my perspective, we're providing value by adding a on-ramp to contributorship for folks that are on the side of Rocky, for whatever that means. And I know that there's historically been a lot of kind of bad feelings and such between the community. I mean, and Lewis kind of hit it on the head earlier with being confused. Like, I understand in general, I guess, why these changes are made, but I think that where we're all coming from ultimately is wanting to be part of that conversation and be able to have time to work with Red Hat and manage the responses from our communities too, because that's the other thing, is as much as the response comes from our communities, we can in some ways help to tame those responses if people are getting very emotional and attacking people with their words and stuff that I've seen online. I think we can help to tame those if those conversations are able to be had before decisions like this are announced. And I know I got off on a tangent there, but
no, I appreciate the information. Can you talk a little bit about what differentiates Rocky Linux from Alma Linux, or the direction that SUSE has? What makes Rocky stand out?
Yeah, the SUSE's perspective is sort of a hard fork. I was just listening to them on your show earlier this week. They're taking the perspective that they're going to take what they're doing and publish it and do what they're doing with it, right? They're not promising anything about the one-to-one compatibility, bug-for-bug compatibility, whatever kind of buzzword I guess we want to really use. But I guess when it comes down to it, what Rocky is doing is just continuing on with what we were doing before. That is rebuilding the sources from Red Hat and producing a compatible distribution thereof. Alma Linux has taken a slightly different approach, where they are remaining binary compatible to the extent that they can, and will test to, and they're doing a great job, I think, in working on that and providing updates to their users in accordance with that direction that they've chosen. But from Rocky, it's kind of just business as usual in some ways, other than I think the thing I will say is that this announcement certainly has reinvigorated a lot of us, myself included, on working on Rocky Linux and upstream projects, but continuing to work on our open source build system, Peridot, where we have a second version of that that's coming out, or we hope will be coming out in the next year, as we're working on redesigning some of the core components of it to support features that we have grown into needing, as well as features that we are specifically adding to help the community that's using Rocky in the post announcement world that we're now in terms of answering questions of what sources we're using, and how a user of Rocky Linux can attest to the fact that those sources are authentic in some way.
Speaking of sources, I read your initial, I suppose, blog post when this all came out, and wondered whether or not you guys have any additional information about how you intend to obtain the source code going forward.
I think the comment I will make is that the blog post outlined our strategies, and I guess I'm not sure exactly how to answer that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer either. I mean, we have multiple, avenues that we want to, utilize, but we don't have like a firm, yeah, for sure, this is how we're gonna always do it, right? Because everything right now is still in flux, right? So nothing is set in stone.
If you're a Red Hat customer, you have access to the source code, and so that's not a GPL violation, because just putting it behind a paywall doesn't make it unavailable. You just have to be a Red Hat customer. So is that an avenue for you, or do you see problems with it?
I mean, I see it as a potential avenue, but there's also, I'm also on that line of well, it could be problematic, right? I can't really speak to, potential problems that could happen, whether, that's legally or something like that. That's not my world, right? I'm just a technical person, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm more of just I kind of feel like I'm in the middle on that. It's I'm part of me is oh, hey, well, at least we still have, that direction we can go, but what are the implications? And a lot of those implications I hear, but I don't completely understand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I'll echo that. Even it really comes down to the classic phrase, I am not a lawyer. And I think where some of this comes down to, and it's not trying to be deceptive or vague or anything like that, but rather, this is something that I am, yes, employed by CIQ and work on Rocky Linux, but I'd be doing that whether or not I was employed by CIQ or not. And so I think for me, it becomes kind of a personal thing to be asked such questions, and because I don't know, as Lewis said, what the implications are there. And I don't want to be wrapped up in legal battles. I want to, to be clear, I want to work collaboratively with CentOS and Red Hat and Fedora and all of the upstreams to make enterprise Linux even better, because it's really good as it is, and Red has done a great job with everything that they've done, from engineering to literally inventing new pieces of software and hiring folks that have created great things. And I'll go out on a limb here and call systemd great, but other things like Pipewire and WirePlumber and these things that have made my day-to-day using Linux actually possible versus where it was a decade and a half ago. A lot of that has come from engineering that has come from Red Hat, and I want to specifically acknowledge that. But we do want to work collaboratively. I personally want to work collaboratively with Red Hat, and it's, I guess, difficult sometimes when we feel as though we are being maybe singled out or targeted or otherwise. Whether that's real or not is another thing, but I think there's certainly been a lot of drama in the past month and past 2.5 years or so that we've been working on all this since the change for CentOS Stream. And I think all of us would wish that it had gone a different way in many, many respects. But we have to move forward in some fashion, and I want to move forward in a positive way.
If you find a way to continue to obtain the Red Hat source material, are you okay talking about it, or are you fearful that if you're open and honest about how you're obtaining the source, that Red Hat would potentially pull the plug on you?
I think it's a valid concern, and one that I do have, but that's not going to stop us from being transparent and open about what we are doing. There's no use in being opaque, and any opaqueness I think that is seen is because we're figuring out how best to relay the information, I guess, and also what the information is, right? Like Lewis said, there are multiple avenues that we're taking. And honestly, I hope that one of those, or wish that one of those, could be working with Red Hat directly for some of this, whether it's in a business relationship or otherwise.
So I want to follow up with some of that too. So I've heard you say a bunch of times that you want to engage with Red Hat and you want to work collaboratively with the community and so on. It seems to me that Red Hat has decided that if you want to work collaboratively with them, they've opened up a path of communication, and that's where they're looking. So it's kind of similar to what I do with Noah, because Noah's all in an element, and I have long been on this show kind of poo-pooing it. And so if Noah and I want to communicate, he had to make a way for that to work with Telegram, because that just happens to be where I live. And I don't see that as much different than what Red Hat is doing and saying, hey, we still want contributions, but the way we want it is through the CentOS stream pathway, and here's the way that we've kind of laid that out. And so I wonder if you kind of take the comedy out of it and just say, hey, one party is saying, well, we want to talk with you, but this is the channel of communication that we're accepting. Why not work through that process like Alma is attempting to work through?
We are and have in the past. I mean, before even Jonathan has submitted that pull request, and he did a great job on it. Now, I have Bugzilla requests open for various things. I have submitted patches and have them pulled in to fix issues in CentOS Stream a few times now. So it's not as if we are not communicating and working in the way that they have indicated even before this announcement that they want us to.
The folks who say, well, just pull from Stream, they do have a point, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of what they do is in Stream, and from my point of view, Stream is actually gives me a good, clear indicator of what to expect, of what's coming up, the next point release.
Yeah.
It gives me a good, clear indication. I think where the issue ends up being is there tends to be quite a few like software version rebases and such like that, where those don't normally happen within the 6 months of a point release existing, right? So when Red Hat releases like a patch to address some kind of CVE or whatnot, that CVE may have already been addressed and fixed in some rebased version of Stream, which would make it difficult for my team, who's just this team of 7 people who are in varying time zones and we all got day jobs. Makes it a bit difficult for us to try to grok that out and figure out what actually changed or what happened. And it also makes it a little more difficult, too, to see what exactly they've pushed out or what updates they've pushed out. When we were paying attention to get CentOS org, it was fairly straightforward to kind of see like, oh, well, this update came in and this is what changed. You could see it in like a Git commit. You can kind of see the diff and kind of get a clear idea of what's going on. But for the cases of things like that, where I'm trying to think of a package example, and I'm having a hard time thinking of one. I saw this kind of recently where, some CVE gets addressed in the point release, and then later it gets, addressed in like Stream, for example, like later down the road, but it's addressed in some like updated version. And to me, it's kind of odd because we can't, from our point of view, we don't want to just rebase that software version of like whatever there's in Stream, because that kind of, in my opinion, defeats the purpose of trying to match for the most part. Makes it kind of difficult for us to be in line. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird line, because it's like if we had more folks like on our team that were able to like handle a lot of this stuff, it might not be an issue to try to research that and grok it every chance we get. But I'm just a single person. I got a day job. I can't be glued to my screen 24/7 and all that. And it's I don't know. It's difficult. There are development things that are happening in Stream that are like rebasing versions that aren't actually happening for the 6 months of like, for example, like 9.2. Like you won't see it's very rare to see a version of something just jump from like 1.0 to like 2.0 or something. Whereas that would happen in Stream. Would make it difficult for us to figure out, okay, well, where in this is this fix? It's kind of really hard to like have a definitive answer for that.
Yeah, I think the other side of it too, right, is when it is just one-to-one. Like you can literally just go pick the commit out of CentOS Stream because that's where the development happened. Like true to word, and CentOS Stream does what it says on the box. It is where RHEL development happens. It's just not universally true for every package, for every release that happens in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, because of those rebases that can happen to fix things. It's not a CVE example, but I recently opened up a bug for Grafana in Rocky and RHEL 9.2 because as we were rebuilding it, we happened to run into a ticking time bomb in one of the tests that was hard coded to a date that we were building after. And so I went and opened a bug, and I opened a merge request with Red Hat for this, and eventually it got fixed via rebase, and it wasn't really an issue for Red Hat. But to their credit, the bug stayed open and it's being closed by that rebase, even though it's not even inherently a customer bug or anything that really was affecting Red Hat in any meaningful manner. So the process works. I think it just needs more people that are advocating for it, and I want to be one of those people that advocates for it. And it's, I guess, a bit disheartening when these sorts of events happening and the contributions and effort I am making feels as though it is not wanted or wanted less just because I'm working on the rebuild project of it as well. And I know that's not true. I know enough people and speak to enough people at Red Hat that isn't necessarily true, that the contributions are wanted, but it's hard, I guess, to participate in that environment and continue to feel invigorated and motivated to contribute to that community when these sorts of large generalizations painting happen or announcements happen, and all of this other drama, infighting, etc., bad feelings, bad juju gets passed around as a result. It's not good for anyone really involved in the situation, and that's what I think we all need to really remember about working in these sorts of environments, that we're all human and that we're all people on the other side. So it's something I have to remind myself of too.
So your plan going forward is to obtain the Red Hat source files and then continue to base a bug-for-bug equivalent distribution. Can I ask, what will your plan be going forward if Red Hat in any way prevents you from obtaining their source code?
We've talked about it. We've kind of like thrown paint at the wall, but nothing's really stuck yet. And we haven't really thought deeply about it, right? I mean, we've had a lot of.
I think we've thought really deeply about it, but we've not gotten anywhere.
Well, I guess that's true. Yeah, I mean, we have thought deeply, but we just never really have come to a complete full consensus, because that is on our mind. I mean, that is definitely something that kind of just lingers at the back of our mind. And one of the thoughts I had was like, well, we're already try to build the stream stuff already to try to help us be prepared for the next point release. Like, we already kind of take care of that, so it's like we already have that. But how sufficient is that going to be for our distribution if, say, Red Hat, like in your example, like they decide to shut that stuff off? Like, we thought far through it, but we just haven't come to this is our backup plan. We don't. It is something we talk about. I would say at least for probably at least once a week ever since all this stuff came up. We've kind of.
What I'm hearing is, in the event that Red Hat were to pull the source code, the path forward would be very difficult for Rocky's current goals.
Right. It would be pretty difficult, and that's part of why we're sitting there trying to think like, okay, well, what is Plan B? And sorry.
And the reason for that too, and you bring up a good point, is that the feedback that we've received from the folks that are using Rocky is that they are happy with our decision so far to continue doing what we're doing. That's what the project was started for, and is a pretty strong conviction of the the team leads group that has kind of consensus over the Rocky Linux project. We do have a Rocky Linux board that's made out of the group there as well, but we're pretty committed to our initial goal, whatever that may be, and we're also committed to rolling with the punches of. I don't want to say punches.
I get what you mean, not in a negative way, but just rolling with the changes. I get it.
Rolling with the changes, I use it, but I don't mean it in an aggressive or combative sense. But we're committed to continuing to fulfill that goal, regardless of what it means. Whether it means having to take an approach like Alma, where they're staying compatible. Like, we haven't made any decision, but we're definitely committed to keeping our users satisfied with whatever it is, and keeping up the high quality that I'm personally proud of, which also comes from Red Hat, so that's pride from Red Hat there.
It'll be interesting to see what SUSE's fork ends up doing to the mix of things when they get that up and running. You guys have already said we don't really have a concrete plan moving forward. It's just something to kind of mull around, I think, in the background. Is there's going to be this hard fork, which is essentially doing a bunch of the lifting for you guys to the tune of $10 million, however that is spent over whatever period of time. But at any rate, there's going to be some full-time people working on this SUSE fork, and it'll be interesting to see what impact that will have on the landscape.
From kind of a weird, like, geeky, nerdy point of view, I'm kind of interested to see how that's going to look, right? Like if I take myself out of the seat of developing Rocky Linux and just go back to me being an old sysadmin engineer like I was, a long time ago, like, seeing that, I'm like, oh, well, that seems kind of interesting, and then I just kind of keep my eyes on it, and I'm always willing to try stuff and just take a look at, like, what they're doing. And it's kind of interesting and kind of fascinating, because I kind of do wonder, maybe not so much like the technical aspect of it, but more or less like, okay, well, how is it going to look? And like you said, like, how is it going to, what kind of impact is it going to make, if any? Right. And it's kind of for me, it's a curiosity thing at this point. This definitely goes back to when I was much younger, trying Linux for the first time. Like, oh, this seems interesting. Like, it's kind of, it's bringing me back to that kind of an optimistic view, I guess you could say.
It'll be interesting to see whether they put any kind of opinion in it, because now that they've declared it to be a fork, will they make some sort of opinionated statement with it, or are they going to just attempt to fork and track RHEL, and how that's going to impact the broader community? Like, who knows? People might like the SUSE fork.
Yeah, I wonder that too, because I've not touched the latest, like, Amazon Linux, because I think that's based off of Fedora.
And a bit of Stream.
Yeah, and a bit of Stream, I think. Yeah, I think you're probably right. So it's like I would imagine that's pretty opinionated, So it's I would have to imagine maybe SUSE is going to have something fairly, maybe not fully like 100%, like, this is, we got to change everything 100%, even though we're forking. I'd have to imagine maybe some opinions are going to be in there, and, for better or for worse, I guess.
And it's also, I think, a question that has come up in the Ethel steering committee, the extra packages for Enterprise Linux. With Alma's decision, even Jonathan was in the steering committee last week or the week before, saying that they're still intending to continue to support Apple on it, and so it'll be interesting to see how the kind of more loosely associated communities are shaken by this as well. If there's enough divergence for tooling to have to change or anything like that, there hopefully won't be, but it's possible that there are more impacts to additional communities outside of even Enterprise Linux because of this, with variations in how things work.
Any interest in adopting the SUSE Enterprise fork of RHEL? So they've said that they're going to go out kind of on their own. They're going to do this thing. And as part of that, one of the things that they've said they're going to do is put it all out in the open, so anybody can do that. If Red Hat becomes difficult to track, and you can't make changes based on that, would it make more sense to follow the SUSE's lead?
It very possibly may. It's, I guess, a question, right, of what our community wants and how we would roll with those changes. I think that there's more or less an infinite number of options on the table. The tooling that we've built with SRPM proc and with our build tooling infrastructure, it doesn't really care per se where the sources come from. Obviously, our users care, the people consuming the software, specifically in a supply chain security context, care where the software is coming from. But our tooling doesn't necessarily care about where we're getting the actual source RPMs from. We've built it in such a way that it can customize in a repeatable fashion as long as we're able to give it RPMs. So we're positive on the future of Rocky in that respect.
Louis Abel, the release engineer and lead for Rocky Linux, along with Neil Hanlon, the infrastructure lead for the RESF and Rocky Linux. Gentlemen, we appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Thanks, Noah.
Thanks
Steve.
for having us. Appreciate it.
The music in our ears, it means we're out of time, and thank you for joining us. If you'd like to keep up to date with the latest, follow us on X now, I guess. Also available at twitter.com. I promise it's not an adult site, it's just the new name for Twitter. At Ask Noah Show, I'm at Colonel Linux, he's at Linux Ovens. You can get the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow. We record live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. You can catch that at asknoahshow.com. We're back next week, Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. Have a good week.